Now that we have looked into the individual terminologies and the keywords related to the function and function app, let us look at how the overall all the terminologies will fit in to get a better understanding of the function or the function app. Every function app has the processing logic that would be implemented. That is the logic you want to apply, and the function will have a trigger and an input and an output binding. So a typical function will include all the three artifacts such as the trigger, input binding and output binding. The trigger could be a timer based trigger, API, HTTP trigger, blob, service bus and various other standard triggers. An input binding typically depends on your trigger. If your trigger is an HTTP, then you may have a JSON binding. If it's a blob, you will have the blob bindings and various other uh, binding input types. An output binding depends on the type and to depend on the data that you're sending and the third party you're sending to. So if you're sending it to a service bus, you will create the required message to be sent it to a topic. If you're sending it to a blob, you will send the data and the file name and the data to be stored into the blob. So it depends on your output system that you're trying to connect. But a typical Azure function includes the logic, the processing logic, which is in the middle, and you'll have a trigger. You'll have to define the trigger and the input binding based on the trigger, and also identify the output binding. Now note that the input binding and output bindings are not mandatory. You could still have your Azure function work with a trigger and have the processing logic. But an input binding will help you to reduce the code and the processing time required for your Azure function.